Today, George Washington is known as perhaps the most legendary figure in American history, but he did not start out this way. In fact, he began his military career fighting for the British Army against the French and native tribes of the Northeast. These battles, which shaped the young Washington, were horrific affairs, witnessed to hand-to-hand combat and vicious close-quarters frontier fighting. Tonight, join history at the OK Corral as we dive into the story of young Washington's first taste of combat in the Battle of Jumonville Glen. Pennsylvania, May 28, 1754. Lieutenant Colonel George Washington squints through the near-total darkness of a starless night, looking down upon an encampment of 36 French-Canadian soldiers in the glen below, 60 miles east of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Flanked by 40 Virginia troops and a dozen Iroquois warriors, the 21-year-old Washington stands at the precipice of a vicious battle, one that will prove to be a defining point in his life. Pressure has been building to this catalytic event between the French and British Empire for years, as their imperialist desires for North America come to a head. The French, under the rule of King Louis XV, have been expanding ever southward from northeastern Canada, where New France holds substantial territory. From the eastern half of Canada, throughout the Great Lakes region, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico by way of the Mississippi River. Disputes over these resource-rich lands are nothing new to the French Empire. The Beaver Wars of the 17th century saw clashes over the territory that plagued the Northeast for nearly a century, and its conclusive treaty, the Great Peace of Montreal that brought 39 indigenous nations together to make a peace with New France in 1701, provided but 16 years of ceasefire before violence broke out again. The expansionist desires of New France faced a looming threat in what would become a multi-dimensional conflict for the highly sought-after Ohio country, a region which was comprised of present-day Ohio, Indiana, and parts of western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. This territory was collected under the British royal grant to the Ohio Company, entrusted to encourage settlement as well as to offer protection from French aggression and advancement into the region. Among the champions of British colonial expansion was Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie, a native of Glasgow, Scotland. While many governors of British colonies remained in Europe, Dinwiddie served as the de facto royal governor of Virginia. His interest in the Ohio country was not purely political, as he was a major stockholder in the Ohio Company. The Ohio Company had conducted surveys and established a few small settlements in the Ohio Territory. In 1753, upon learning of the construction of multiple French fortifications near Lake Erie, Governor Dinwiddie would send an 8-man party to formally request the French withdrawal from the territory. Dinwiddie selected a young major from the Virginia militia to lead this expedition, a 21-year-old George Washington. The Virginian governor was not the only leader in the area who took opposition to the French territorial expansion. A Mingo chief, Treacherous, also known as the Half-King, also took umbrage with the new fortifications being built in his region. The Half-King had met with the commander of French-Canadian construction efforts, Paul Marin de la Malgue, and Treacherous had bestowed a belt of wampum to the commander in a goodwill gesture before delivering a message of concern for the French advancements. The French commander had took a direct and incendiary approach to his response, slamming down the wampum to the floor and charging back, "I tell you, before the river I will go. If the river is blocked up, I will have the forces burst it open and tread under my feet all that oppose me. I despise all the stupid things you have said." Understandably, this insulted the Half-King, and he had already had a particular disdain for the way his people had been treated by the French, treating the natives more as offspring than equals. In December of 1753, Major Washington's envoy would head northwest to the Ohio Territory. The directive Washington was given, handed down from Dinwiddie directly from London, is as follows. If the French were found to be building forts on English soil, they should be peacefully asked to depart. If they have failed to comply, however, we do hereby strictly charge and command you to drive them off by force of arms." The order was signed directly by King George II. Washington's selection for this mission at such a young age was in part because of his experience as a land surveyor, which gave him a unique understanding of the terrain that he was about to traverse. Upon their arrival at Logstown, Major Washington requested a conference with Seneca tribal leader Treacherous. Washington handed the Half-King's associate a string of wampum and some tobacco to his deputy upon delivering the request. On November 25th, the Half-King arrived to meet Washington and intimated to the young major many horrid tales of the French, that they had killed, cooked, and then cannibalized his father, that he was told that he and his people were akin to flies and mosquitoes, as mere annoyances to the French. The native leader said that he viewed the British as trading peers, while their French counterparts were coming to conquer and displace them. The Half-King adorned George Washington with the nickname Canatacarius, the same nickname that was likewise bestowed upon George's great-grandfather, John Washington. The name means town taker and destroyer of villages, and while it might seem like a bit of a slight against him, Washington was quite happy with the name, and would even write about it later in life, noting that it was not given to him as an insult. Washington's request for the Half-King to provide an escort to the French fort to deliver his diplomatic message was granted, after a few days' delay for the natives to ceremonially bestow wampum on their new young ally. The escort that he was offered was composed of only 4 men, including the Half-King, and the journey consisted of 5 days of trudging through near-freezing rains, bitter winds, and thick mud from the ground that had not yet solidified under a proper winter's freeze. Washington arrived at the trading post of Venango and was greeted by the French captain Philippe Thomas Chabert de Joncaire, born to a French officer and a Seneca woman. He served as a translator in French and Indian affairs. The wine flowed freely that night, but Washington kept his wits about him and listened keenly as the French began to disclose their ambitious design to take possession of the Ohio, and they revealed the location of their forts in drunken negligence. After a few days' delay at Venango, the young Major Washington's party, now accompanied by both a native as well as a French escort, headed off for Fort Le Boeuf. The 40-mile journey consisted of some of the most difficult conditions he had faced yet, with many mires and swamps needing to be covered. With the temperature plummeting below freezing, Washington rode on ahead of his party with Christopher Gist. Gist was a frontiersman from North Carolina cut from the same cloth as Daniel Boone, a man who Gist would call his neighbor while living on the Pennsylvania frontier. Gist had been hired by the Ohio Company for £150, a meager salary that Washington would have been happy to pay him innumerable times over if he had had the requisite funds. The arduous journey to Fort Le Boeuf would come to a close on the night of December 11th, as Washington and Gist would arrive at the makeshift compound consisting of 4 buildings put together with haste using bark and plank. Was the gray-haired, one-eyed commander who remained hospitable even after learning of Washington's message calling for the withdrawal of French Canadians from the Ohio Valley. St. Pierre informed Washington that he did not feel obliged to obey the directive he had been delivered, and stated that the French had every right to kill and capture British traders within the Ohio country. Colonial Britain's concerns about French expansion had now been proven accurate, and Washington took great care while at the fort to compile extensive notes on the hundreds of canoes and the extensive armaments that the French had stockpiled. Before heading back, Washington would come to find that St. Pierre had offered liquor, guns, and provisions to the Half-King and his men in an attempt to get them to stay at Fort Le Boeuf and forego returning as guides with Washington. Upon learning of this plot, an irate Washington confronted the Half-King and accused him of betraying his agreement and confidence. The Half-King denied any involvement, but was understandably irritated by the accusation. While Washington had a zealous ambition to return to Williamsburg with news of the belligerent actions of the French and their non-compliant response to his delivered message, the journey home put the young major's life in precarious circumstances on multiple occasions. The horses that had been brought along on the journey were in such poor condition that it was decided better to abandon them. Washington and Gist, with a couple of the natives as guides, headed forth on their own as they endeavored to promptly bring the French response to Governor Dinwiddie. As Gist and Washington navigated their canoe through icy waters, nearly being upended on multiple occasions and plunging into the frigid current, they arrived at the first rest stop. And when their native guides would not continue on with them, they made the trek on their own. Along the way, they met a party of French Indians who agreed to be their guides, taking them the shortest way to the Ohio River. Washington was suffering from exhaustion so severely, he let one of the guides carry his backpack along the route. After trekking a substantial distance, the French Indian guide suddenly raced out ahead of them and turned around just 10 yards away and fired directly at Washington and Gist. Christopher Gist rushed forward and took the native to the ground, preparing to slay their would-be killer when Washington cried out for him to stop. Washington spared the hostile guide's life, instead opting to bind him until dusk and then release him into the woods. Washington and Gist traveled until dawn in the opposite direction, all the while fearing a reprisal attack. They would then spend an entire day crafting a makeshift raft to cross the Allegheny River. Once they launched the watercraft, they became aware of how swift and violent the current truly was, and when the canoe struck a chunk of ice racing downstream, Washington was thrown into the freezing waters. He fought his way to the surface and latched onto a chunk of wood from the canoe that was floating past him. Gist would manage to stay aboard the craft and steer it towards a small island. From here, he would fish the soaking Washington out of the water, and the two would promptly find themselves trapped there until daybreak would afford them enough visibility to continue on. They would both shiver all through the night. But Washington's remarkable constitution was on display, as he would survive relatively unscathed. Gist would be the one to suffer frostbite, the icy plague slowly taking over his fingers and toes, even though Washington had been the one who had plunged into the wintry stream. At dawn, they were relieved to see that the river had frozen overnight, and they crossed the remainder of it with relative ease. On January 16, 1754, Washington arrived in Williamsburg to hand-deliver the sealed letter from the French commandant to Royal Governor Dinwiddie. At this meeting, Washington would outline much of the details he had observed and recorded in his journals about the French fortifications and capabilities. Dinwiddie asked Washington to compile his notes into a concise report which he could deliver to the council the next day. Washington spent the night arranging the report, and its impact would be far greater than the young major could have expected. The report was published across the colonies as far north as Massachusetts, and it would be printed as a pamphlet in London entitled The Journal of Major George Washington. This thrust his name into the spotlight for the first time. For this expedition, Washington was paid £50, a figure that he found unfavorable, but he managed to parlay the event into a promotion to the rank of lieutenant colonel just around the time of his 22nd birthday. Dinwiddie ordered the construction of a fort at the forks of the Ohio, the location that had been suggested to him by Washington, and he brought on William Trent of the Ohio Company as a captain, with instructions to commence building the fort at once. Washington was ordered to cobble together what forces he could and to march them to the forks of the Ohio that spring to secure the area for the fort's construction. That February also saw 800 French-Canadian militia troops depart from Montreal, heading to the Ohio Valley. Washington's forces were paltry in comparison, a truly ragtag bunch, numbering just 160 at the time of departure. The Virginian wrote of his men that they were, quote, loose, idle persons that are quite destitute of house and home, and quite many of them clothes. Washington sought red uniforms for his men, of the kind worn by His Majesty's troops. He felt as though the colonial regiments were looked upon as second-class citizens, a feeling that would linger throughout his British colonial military career. When word came to Dinwiddie of a French raiding party charting a path towards the forks of the Ohio, Washington was ordered to take what troops he had and to head out at once. He was instructed to maintain a defensive posture, but was authorized to use deadly force were the French to obstruct any of their settlements or their fortifications. On April 2nd, Washington headed out with his green recruits. 3 weeks of traveling had passed when Washington received unsettling intelligence about French activity in the Ohio country. Over 1,000 French troops had overtaken British forces at the forks of the Ohio River, and the fort had fallen into French hands, being renamed Fort Duquesne. On the night of May 24th, Washington received word from his scouts that a French platoon had crossed the river and was staying just 18 miles away. Washington took up a defensive position at the Great Meadows near present-day Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Christopher Gist reported to Washington that French soldiers had invaded his cabin and threatened to kill his livestock and pillage his home. The Half-King, having rejoined forces with Washington once more, confirmed the existence of this rogue band of French Canadians and informed him that they had set up camp just 7 miles from their present location. Upon hearing this, Washington altered course from his defensive mindset, not wanting to toil through another night waiting to be stumbled upon or, worse yet, ambushed. Washington and the Half-King set out with 40 men, a dozen of which were natives, and voyaged into a rainy, moonless night, hunting for the French encampment. The night was so dark that the men continuously stumbled into one another as they marched single file. 7 soldiers actually went astray in the woods, losing step with those in front of them, but they were unwilling to cry out for help, as a break in the silence would give away their positions to any enemies who might be nearby. In the pre-dawn hours of May 28th, under the navigation of the Half-King, Washington leads the men to the crest of a hollow surrounded by rocks. From the high ground above the sleeping French camp, the natives slipped through the trees to encircle them and to block any escape from Washington and his men. Upon hearing the rustling around them, the French grasp for their arms and shots ring out towards the colonials. Washington's men fire 2 quick volleys that leave at least 10 French soldiers lying dead, while the rest throw down their arms and surrender. Now, as they descend upon the forfeiting side to capture their remaining men, this course of events takes a dark turn. From the woods behind the encampment, the Half-King walks towards the wounded French officer Joseph Couillon de Jumonville and speaks in French. "Thou art not yet dead, my father." The Half-King then raises the hatchet above his head and, with tremendous force, strikes it down upon the skull of Jumonville. He repeats this process 3 more times as a stunned Washington looks on. The Half-King now reaches his hand into the cracked skull of Jumonville, then ritualistically kneads his fingers as though he were washing his hands in it. Washington, having suffered 1 man killed and 3 others wounded, finds himself in a precarious circumstance. He knows that admonishing the Half-King could create an unwanted divide between them, and he seeks the most diplomatic way to make his position a sympathetic one. In his reporting of the events to Governor Dinwiddie, Washington emphasizes the French's aggression in the prelude to the fight, as well as the clandestine way they had spied on their party's activity, whereas Washington had delivered his diplomatic message the prior December with a statesmanlike dignity. The French account is markedly different from that of the British, and will even be used to propagandize Washington as a murderer and inflame the diplomatic relations of the 2 empires in precursor to war. Washington, however, does not have the time to ruminate on the empirical effects of his actions, as he knows a French counterattack will soon be on its way. The Virginian commands his men to dig a circular fortification for the coming onslaught, a fort that will come to be known as Fort Necessity. And the battle that follows will see the young lieutenant colonel captured by his newfound enemies. But the tales of heroism and sacrifice in the years and decades to come are too numerous to cover in one episode. For tonight, those are other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes as well as ad-free viewing and all that good stuff, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the subscribe button down below. Also, down below, you will find links to our TikTok, our Instagram, and our daily newsletter. Subscribe to any of them or all of them. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.